Chapter 9 to 10. After leaving the room, I flipped up my hood and left the establishment. When I walked outside into the alley after glancing at the bouncer, I saw the sun start to rise. Guess I was there longer than I thought. Letting out a sigh, I started walking out of the alley and onto the street. I think what I'll do next is try to make some friends with a politician or two. I highly doubt all the people he has under his thumb are there willingly. If I can figure out who at least one of them is, then maybe I can find one of them and turn them to my side. And if I do that, then there will be a better chance that whatever Henry gets hit with in court will stick. Mr. Toketsu could probably give me some decent info on all the potential politicians. After that thought, I made up my mind on my plan and headed back towards the manor. I was fairly deep into the city, so it did take a few hours to get over to the manor, and it was probably closer to 8 in the morning at this point. Breakfast would probably be served soon. When I was getting close to the manor, when no one was watching, I flashed on my casual outfit and made my way up the steps to the front door. The door opened before I was able to open it. Reginald stood in the doorway and bowed slightly. "Welcome back, sir." I nodded as I passed him. "Reginald, I assume breakfast is being served." "Yes, it was just served moments ago, so please have a seat and we'll have some brought to you." "Thank you." I then made my way into the dining room. When I opened the large doors to the dining room, there was a small clatter of cutlery as Cyrilla, who was closest to door, got up and ran up to me. "Where have you been? You said we were being followed, then you didn't come back." I gave a light chuckle as I patted her head. "Nothing to worry about." I then waved my hand dismissively as she pouted. "Just an assassin who clearly failed at his job." The occupants in the room gained a slightly shocked expression. "An assassin?" spoke Hajime with concern. "What happened?" he asked as I took a seat at the table across from where Cyrilla was seated. After I and Cyrilla's date, I noticed we were being followed, so I sent her off with the driver and an enchanted dagger of mine. A plate of bacon, eggs and toast were placed in front of me. I more or less just wandered around town until nightfall, so there were less people around. I pretended to be lost and headed down an alley. That's when the would-be assassin made his move. After a quick interrogation with him, and a broken rib on his part, they flinched at that. I was told of a place where criminals usually gather on the other side of town, hidden away. I had only ever heard whispers of a place like that, always thought it was real, spoke Hajime. While your average person wouldn't be able to find it, I found it with ease. I smirked at that. The place itself was relatively nice on the inside, but some of the people didn't look too nice, one of them being Henry with a woman on both his arms. They frowned at that. "He's after my daughter but is with other women," Cheryl said with disgust. I nodded, my thoughts exactly. "Did he see you? What did you find out?" Cyrilla asked. "I was in a disguise, so I wasn't seen, and I got some information out of someone who was working there. I learned that he has a hand in the drug trade, and there has been rumors that he's dabbling in sex trafficking." The last one really put the family in a sour mood. "Do you have a plan?" asked Hajime. "I do actually." I looked him in the eye. "And I'll need your help." "My help?" I nodded in response to his question. "What do you need from me?" "Information on this town's legal system and any half-decent politicians." Hajime nodded. "Well, our town works similar to other towns, but still different at the same time. The mayor is a decent fellow, but a lot of the power comes down to the two main senates. Essentially, we have the mayor that runs the town, the two senates who help run the town, and then all the other people that work under them." I nodded and hummed to myself. "The two senates and their groups can outpower the mayor?" Hajime sighed. "Unfortunately, yes." He paused before continuing. "The mayor is actually fairly pleasant, and one of the senates is as well, but it's the other senate who's an issue." "What do you need this information for?" I interlocked my fingers and put my elbows on the table. I was assuming that at least a few people weren't under Henry's thumb willingly, so I thought that if I can bring a few onto my side, then anything in court will stick. Hajime finished. "That's a good idea." I nodded and smirked, then turned to Cheryl. "How are we for time?" "We have the date set for tomorrow at around 10 o'clock in the morning," she responded. "That's not a lot of time, but I can make it work." I then finished my breakfast and stood up. "What is the name of the senator and mayor that I should speak to?" I asked Hajime. "The mayor is Leonard Spot, and the senator you probably want to speak to is Harry Gateson. Check near the area of town where the mayor's house and such are, and you should find them either around there or in the Senate building doing work." I nodded and started to walk away. "I'll take a bath before I leave, so if you need to speak with me before I leave, then let me know now, since I will probably be gone all day again." Cyrilla looked at me from the table as I stood by the door. "What did you do all night to where you couldn't return?" I chuckled at that. Now that part is a secret. I then walked out of the room. A bath was definitely needed, I thought to myself as I stepped out of the bath and flashed on my casual outfit with the blue button shirt. I walked out of the bathroom and headed outside the manor. A carriage was waiting for me just outside the front door. I nodded to Reginald, who was by the carriage, since I assumed he got it ready for me. When I sat inside, I started to think, since I'm running short on time, I should probably speak to the senator that Mr. Toketsu mentioned first. He said the mayor was a decent person and this hairy guy could be the one person I need for this plan to work. If I had more time I could go after the other one and see what his deal is, but considering the fact that I'm hard pressed for time, it probably won't happen. But then again, if I don't at least speak to the mayor or get some info on him, then this could all be for nothing. My thoughts and plans occupied me for the whole ride into town. I got out of the carriage and tipped the driver before proceeding. I stifled a yawn as I made my way down the street towards the Senate's building. Should have taken a nap before this. I've been up for a while, but it's not like I've stayed up longer before. After a few short minutes of walking, I made it to the area I needed to be. The area itself was rather large. The Senate building looked like something straight out of Roman architecture. Considering Parliament buildings and such looked like this back on Earth anyway, I'm not surprised. There were a multitude of other buildings around and a fairly large fountain at the center. All in all, it was a large, almost circular area, typical of a downtown area or a square back home. After appreciating the area, I decided to make my way straight to the Senate's building. I didn't notice anything out of the usual, so I assumed people were able to head in if they wanted. Probably serves as a courthouse or something as well. There were a few guards outside the building armed with basic spears and armor. They didn't make a move to stop me, so I just gave a light smile and a wave as I walked in through the large doors. Damn, it's big in here, I thought while looking around after I entered. Now how am I gonna find this guy? Glancing around the area, I couldn't see name tags or anything on any of the rooms. There was a large hallway lined with doors every now and then, and at the end of the hallway it split off into 2 more areas or even more. Deciding to walk forward, I heard a feminine voice to my left. "Hi, is there anything I can help you with?" Glancing to my left, I saw a lady sitting behind a counter with a wall of glass between her and the area I was in. There were a few holes in the glass so her voice could travel through and a small slot for things to be slid through. The woman behind the glass was definitely a good-looking woman. She had brown hair tied in a ponytail, brown eyes with a pair of glasses framing them, and she was wearing a blue blouse with black pants. Approaching the glass, I asked her, I was hoping I could speak to a Harry Gateson. She seemed a little surprised but responded quickly, "Did you have an appointment?" I shook my head. "Sadly I don't, but I have an urgent matter I need to discuss with him." She shuffled around some papers for a moment. "He's available tomorrow morning around noon. I could book you then." "That'd be way too late. Is there no chance I could speak with him today?" She shook her head. "Sorry, but he's booked all day today." I thought to myself for a moment, damn, let's try this. I leaned forward, putting on the most charming smile I could. "Are you sure?" It'd only take a few minutes. My eyes gazed into hers. She seemed almost hypnotized as she stared deeply into my red eyes. My eyes almost seemed like they were flowing with some kind of power as she kept gazing. Suddenly she seemed to regain her senses as she immediately started to blush and tuck a strand of hair behind her ears. "Well, he is in a meeting right now that'll be ending soon, so you may be able to catch him." My smile grew. "Why, thank you, Ms. Heather." "Heather," I repeated. "Where is this meeting taking place?" "Down that hall to the left, and once you come to the first hallway on the right, head down it and it's the first door on the right." I stood straight and gave her a smile. "Thank you, Heather." She smiled again as I went to follow her directions. Too bad charm isn't a stat in this world. Sure, my eyes probably have some enchanting effect, but I can't be too sure about that. I smirked. Too bad charm or charisma isn't an official stat on the adventurer card. It took no time at all to reach the room where Harry was in his meeting. I didn't want to enter the room, so I just leaned against the opposite wall with my arms crossed and one foot on the wall, the classic cool guy waiting pose. I didn't have to wait long to see the first few people start to trickle out of the room. Most of the people walking out of the room were middle to old-aged men. Should have gotten a description of the guy first, were my thoughts as I stared individually at the people that exited the room. They more or less ignored me as they made their way out of the room, but my questions about Harry were soon to be answered. There was a man who seemed to be in his late 50s that exited second last and was followed by a middle-aged man behind him who spoke. "Thanks for attending the meeting, Mr. Gateson." The now dubbed Mr. Gateson nodded to the man. He had black hair that was combed back with a few strands of white hair. He had somewhat of a stern face and was beginning to gain wrinkles. He straightened his red tie that was accompanied by a black suit and a white dress shirt. "Well, I just wish it wasn't so long," he jested with a small smile. The two shared a chuckle before the middle-aged man went his separate way. Harry sighed as he prepared himself to make his way to presumably his next meeting. That's when I spoke up. "Mr. Harry Gateson." Harry seemed slightly surprised as he looked in my direction. "Yes, can I help you?" "I was hoping that I could take a moment of your time." He gained a slightly apologetic look as he responded, "I'm sorry, but I need to be somewhere shortly. You can make an appointment at the front desk." He then started to walk away. "I'm here to talk to you about a Henry Fraser." This stopped him dead in his tracks. "If this is about what he asked me to do before, I already did it, so please leave me alone." He said this with a serious face as he looked me dead in the eyes. I chuckled at his feeble attempt at intimidation. "Don't worry, I don't work for him." His gaze softened a bit. "I'm working against him." He then seemed surprised at this, "and I need your help." He seemed confused and thought for a moment before he motioned me into the room he had recently exited from. I entered the room and he closed the door behind me before he spoke. "What do you mean you're working against him? You know of the Toketsus, I presume?" He nodded. "Yes, Mr. Toketsu is a good friend of mine. I wasn't able to attend the dinner he had a few days ago where his daughter got proposed to." "Let's just say you're looking at the guy who proposed." He seemed surprised at this, but before he could speak I cut him off. "But that's not what I was here to tell you." "What is it you needed to tell me?" "No point in hiding my name if I'm going to work with him. While I go by the name Michael as of right now, I started. My real name is Gilgamesh. I've been hired by the Toketsus to get Henry arrested since he is a criminal and has an obsession with their daughter. I have already investigated into him and have seen him in the act of his business, and even been on the receiving end of those who oppose him." I smirked, but as you can see he failed at that. "Why are you telling me all of this? What does this have to do with me? I've heard from Mr. Toketsu that you're a somewhat respectable man who can help me. I have no doubt you already know that Henry has some people in this building under his thumb. What I need from you is to be willing to oppose him and have him put away for his crimes." "You don't think I've wanted to do that?" he said with slight anger. "There's never been enough evidence to have him put away, and he already has the other senator under his thumb. Any judges that have him in their court are already going to say he isn't guilty of anything, and I can't just waltz into his home and arrest him. Not to mention any judge that tries to do the right thing mysteriously lose their jobs." Practically your average crime drama right here." "Already assumed as much." I shrugged and then looked him in the eyes again. "What does he have against you? Earlier you mentioned doing something for him. How bad is it that you don't want to try perusing him anymore?" Harry had a downtrodden look on his face. "I pardoned a crime of his." "And what in the world made you do something as idiotic as that?" He seemed almost offended at that before he looked down again. "A few months ago I had an affair," he started. "Turns out that the person I slept with was someone working for him, and if I didn't do as he said he'd tell my wife." "What?" was my only response as my face slowly took on an angrier look. "I know it's pitiful Pitiful?" I responded, "Pitiful." He flinched. "You're not trying to put away a man who practically has this whole town in his pocket and apparently is even part of a sex trafficking ring, just because you had an affair." I tried to calm myself down before continuing. "Marriage is about trust and honesty. If you truly love her and she loves you, don't you think you owe it to her to tell her? She's going to hate you even more if she finds out from someone else. If you tell her yourself, then at least there's a chance you can get past it." Harry seemed to contemplate my words for a few minutes before he was able to look into my eyes. "You're right," he sighed, "but even if I go through with this, I still pardoned a crime of his. My word might not even mean anything if he brings that up." I thought for a moment. "Well, it's not like you'd be put on trial in front of the Prime Minister or President back on Earth for something like this. This guy here is more or less just the final nail in the coffin if Fraser tries to worm his way out again. I know barely anything about politics and I'm practically making this up as I go, so how are we gonna get around this? Maybe if we can get a judge to actually agree to this and have him oversee the case and play it off as if Harry doesn't know this is going on, then that way Fraser can't do anything since it'll be too late for him to do anything or out Harry. And Fraser is guaranteed to do something at the wedding if I piss him off enough, whether it is indirectly or not. If I can get everyone at the wedding to see what he's up to, then no amount of favors can get him to slip through any gaps. And if he does somehow worm his way out, then the citizens will realize the system is completely flawed and some kind of higher power like a royal capital who oversees this stuff on a higher level would be forced to step in and replace any of the corrupt officials." I must have been silent for a while since Harry spoke again. "So what is it you plan to do now?" I began to tell him what I was thinking about just then, just worded differently so that it sounded better and more logical. He nodded as I had brought up a few good points. He brought a hand to his chin. "That actually might work." He looked me in the eyes again. "You can leave finding a judge to me." I nodded. "And I have a suggestion." I tilted my head slightly. "A suggestion?" He nodded. "You said you want to make him mad enough to do something to you. When I was looking into him for a time I did come across a place he was using to store things. I have no idea what, but if you can take a look at the place since I haven't been able to get the place searched, then it's possible he could get more agitated. It's on the east side of town, about a 10-minute walk from the cafe there." I nodded and was heading for the door when I stopped to look at him. After all this is done, you will come forth and tell the truth to your wife. While I still find it incredibly stupid and idiotic that you'd go to such lengths to hide something like this, he flinched at my words. You have a chance to make this right and put a bad man away. I wasn't much for speeches, so I didn't continue and just left the building. Might as well do some scouting of this place and wait till nightfall to do anything, I thought to myself as I walked to the eastern side of town. It didn't take long to reach the place, so when I got there I just hopped up on a roof across the building and sat down. The place didn't look like a warehouse you'd see on a pier or docks back home, but it was a wide building you'd expect to be a storage building in older times. Only one guy walking around front, and there's nothing really going on right now. I don't trust my stealth skills enough to sneak in and grab any info, so I'm just gonna have to do a classic stakeout and see what happens. I made myself comfortable and prepared for a long day. Nothing really interesting happened until nightfall hit, mostly just some shady people entering and leaving the building. They didn't seem to be the more respectable members of society, so I kept a close eye. I had been alternating from watching the front of the building and the back, but so far there hasn't really been anything noteworthy. It wasn't until a few hours after sundown that I noticed something peculiar at the backside of the building. A delivery? I thought as I saw a carriage pull up in the alley behind the building. The alley was practically pitch black, so any average person wouldn't be able to see anything. The back of the carriage was almost completely covered by a cloth, so I couldn't see inside. It wasn't until the driver hopped off and went to the back of the carriage did I realize what this was. There's a cage under there. The driver pulled out a key and started opening the back after taking off some of the cloth. A few people exited the back of the building and made their way towards the back of the carriage. I decided to get a better view of the back, and when I was able to see inside the carriage I grimaced. Can't say I'm surprised there's people back there. A bunch of blindfolded and gagged women were all but thrown out of the back and brought in the building. It wasn't until the last person was thrown out did I really get upset. The unforgettable long pink hair made my blood boil. I thought she would have left by now. Someone probably found out that she wanted out of the business and had her taken. She said the owner of the club wasn't that bad, so it must have been a fan or something. Yila was practically shoved the whole way since she was resisting the most. Once they were all inside the building I started to make my move. I wasn't going to forego stealth, but I wasn't exactly going in that quiet. Hey, this is private property, Paul, back off, said one of the three goons that were now guarding the back entrance as I walked out from the shadows after hopping down from the building. I didn't break stride and kept walking. Buddy, we aren't gonna ask again, said one of the other goons as they stepped forward and pulled out daggers. I still kept walking, and that's when the first goon walked up to me and went to grab me. Don't even think about touching me. A dark glow came from my eyes as I scared him stock still for a moment. My face wasn't visible since it was covered by shadows, so all this guy saw was glowing red eyes. This made the man flinch, but he still pressed forward after shaking his head, so I backhanded him so hard he practically flew across the whole alley. The other two men were shocked and looked like they were about to shout, so I rushed them both and bonked them on the head, knocking the two out before a breath could escape. Then with a short sigh, I pushed the door open and headed inside. The inside of the building was dark and didn't seem super open. I was currently standing in a hallway lined with doors that were spaced far in between each other. Must be storage rooms for something, but I don't see anyone. With that I closed my eyes and focused on my hearing. I pushed my enhanced senses to the limit for any sounds. I can hear some people in the rooms ahead, but no muffled noises caused by a gag or anything. It wasn't till I heard an audible thud somewhere below me. There must be a way down. While staying somewhat quiet, I walked across the hallway and snuck by a few sleeping guards that were placed throughout the place. Eventually tucked away on one of the walls on the far left side of the building did I find a staircase heading down. Very faintly, I heard a muffled female scream and a man shouting, "Shut up." Someone must be resisting. I quickly hastened my pace by practically jumping the whole set of stairs, and it was a pretty far jump, and I did make some noise. When I eventually reached the bottom, I heard shouting as people who were sitting around a table playing cards stood up and pulled out either knives or swords. There were about 6 in total, and the disruption caused a few doors to open, and some of the people entering were in a slight state of undress. They now had a number of 15 or so people with weapons drawn and fists raised, ready to fight. There was one person who sauntered forward. Oh, a familiar face. I directed my gaze toward them and saw a scarred man staring at me. I've seen this guy with Henry at the party and around town. Must be a right hand or something. The cause of my boss's troubles just so happens to stick his nose in some business and falls right in my lap. He chuckled, and it's gonna be fun when I bring you to him all beaten up and begging to be let go. This caused his buddies to laugh, and when their chuckles died down, I started to chuckle myself. What's so funny, Blondie? Spoke the scared guy. My chuckles slowly grew into a laugh, and I had to stop myself after about 5 seconds or I would have gone for a while. My face gained a mocking smirk as I put my right hand Yupan did a bring it on motion without saying a word. They all frowned at my response and all of the men in the room but the scarred man rushed me. Only 14 people. That's not fair for them. One person who wasn't wielding a knife was the first to reach me. He threw a punch to my face, but it was sloppy. I shifted my head slightly to the right and punched him in the gut, forcing him to double over and pass out. The next combatants were 3 people, one with a dagger, a sword, and the last one seemed to be using some type of metal bar. I sidestepped the guy with the dagger and ducked slightly under a horizontal slash from the guy with the sword. When the thug who was wielding the metal pipe came to hit me, I raised my hand, caught the man's wrist and twisted it, causing it to snap and him to drop the pipe. I then kicked him back and hit the sword thug with an uppercut that lifted him off his feet. I then turned to the dagger-wielding thug as he rushed me and repeated my actions with the pipe wielder and threw the dagger that I took from him towards someone's leg who was rushing me. Feels like hand-to-hand fighting from Assassin's Creed. With 5 down and about 9 to go, I got ready again. 5 people rushed me this time around, but they didn't fare much better than the last 4. With a small burst of speed I went between 2 of the 5 and smashed their heads together, knocking them out. The remaining 3 tried to slash at me, but I leaned back Matrix style and avoided the attacks. After rising I punched 2 in the face, breaking their noses and kicking the last one in the chest, sending him flying into one of the doors at the back of the room. The door shattered when he hit it, allowing me to glance in the room. Mysterious packages, which are probably drugs. The women are probably in the other ones and the rest of the drugs must be stored upstairs. The remaining 4 and the scarred man stared shocked at what I had done. In barely a minute I had dispatched of 10 people and didn't even seem to be trying. I stared mockingly at the remaining thugs and they all dropped their weapons. The scarred man seemed angry that his men surrendered but couldn't do anything since I rushed past the 4 thugs and sent him crashing through a wall and into one of the rooms. This room seemed to have about 5 or so women in the room tied up and sitting on the floor. They all seemed to be listening to the struggle outside and were incredibly relieved. One of the women looked directly at me and widened her eyes as she looked at me. It's you," spoke the pink-haired Ela. "Who else would it be?" I smirked. "Now I'm gonna deal with the rest, then come back," I said while handing her a dagger from my gate after cutting her bonds. "Help the rest out of their bonds and I'll see to the rest of this building's inhabitants." She nodded at my words and began to help everyone else in the room and went off to the other rooms. Once everyone was set free and the rest of the goons were tied up or incapacitated by yours truly, I went outside the back of the building into the alley. Once I left the building I was greeted to the sight of all the people being held captive, hugging each other or sitting down on crates and the like, crying. I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned around to see Ela behind me. "Thanks for saving us. I can't imagine how long some of them were here or how much they endured." I turned fully to speak with her. "No worries, I was watching this place for signs of criminal activity and I just happened to witness a delivery and decided to intervene." "Either way, thank you," she smiled. I turned around as she went to my side as we watched over the people that were outside. "What will you do now?" I asked while looking over the people. She sighed. "I was gonna leave, but when someone caught wind of it they snatched me up and took me here. I don't even know where I want to go or what to do." I turned my head. "Well, my business here will be concluded by about noon tomorrow morning if all goes well." She looked at me. "I'll then be making my way back to Axel, so if you're willing to wait a day I can take you there." Her expression softened. "But what can I do there?" "Not like I can live off you," she said the last part with a slight joking tone. I chuckled. "I can talk to one of the people at the guild and see if they can get you a job working at the bar or as a server. There's also an inn across from the guild that is fairly affordable, unless you want to live with me for a bit." I said the last part also jokingly. She chuckled and seemed to lighten up a bit more. "That would be nice, but I can't just bum off you forever. But a job working at your guild might be a nice change of pace, even though I was just working at 1 inch. You won't have to worry too much. Luna and the rest of the women there are good people. The adventurers can be pretty rowdy, but I or someone else usually keeps them in line. I'll hold you to that." We then heard a few people making their way over. A small squad of guards came into view. "Well, I'll let them know what happened here so you can leave if you want," she said while looking at the guards. "It would be best if I at least gave a statement and they're already here," I said while turning to the guards. I gave my statement and told them about what happened in this place. When they asked how I managed to deal with it, I just responded with that I was a private investigator who had combat experience. They seemed worried but nodded and tried to get statement out of whomever they could. I soon bid farewell to Ela and told her that I would find her when all my business was concluded tomorrow. And with that I made my way back to the manor. "Damn, am I tired," I chuckled to myself. "Haven't slept in over 24 hours. Nothing in particular woke me up this morning, just the good old internal clock waking me up fairly early in the morning. After I parted ways with Ela last night, I made my way back to the manor for a much-needed sleep. There wasn't really anything else to plan since after today it would be in the hands of Harry and whomever he entrusted to help him go along with the plan I gave him. Plus there isn't really anything else I could possibly do that wouldn't be just beat the ever-loving crap out of Henry until he confessed, or another stakeout with officials to catch him doing something, and with the wedding being in the next few hours, time is up for the most part. Might as well get this over with because I want to get home and relax. I sighed and have to get Ela a job at the guild, so I should leave as soon as he's taken into custody. Won't have enough time to see his trial. With a good stretch and a few twists to crack some joints, I stood up from my bed and walked to the mirror in the room that was next to the window. I stared at myself in my white long-sleeve shirt and loose black pants and smirked a little. Good thing I picked out a suit before I came on this quest. There was a small flash of light as I changed into a new outfit. The earrings I usually wore with my armor were now accompanied by a gold two-piece suit with a black interior, a black shirt, black tie and brown dress shoes. My hair stayed in its let-down position as I looked myself up and down. The tailor did a good job. I admired the suit, even though it was a rush order for the next day, it still looks very good. Probably helps that my gait would have fixed any imperfections that there were. There was then a knock at my door before I heard a voice that belonged to Reginald. Sir Gilgamesh? If you are awake, it would be best that we leave the manor soon. Mr. and Mrs. Toketsu have already left to make the final preparations. After walking over to the door, I opened it with a small smirk. I'm awake and am as ready as I can be. Reginald nodded. I will be escorting you myself. He bowed. I hope all goes well and I thank you for all your help in this issue. I waved him off and chuckled. No need to bow. I was simply doing my job. Reginald then led me towards the exit of the manor. The carriage that was parked at the front seemed a tad fancier than the rest of the carriages I had ridden so far. It was all black with a gold outline and two very nice-looking white horses. Reginald climbed up the driver's side after making sure I made it into the carriage. Before the main cathedral in the church, he started speaking loud enough for me to hear. There will be a small reception with a large portion of the guests, then after an hour or so, everyone will be moved into the main cathedral. There won't be any delays or speeches before Cyrilla walks down the aisle, unless you wish to say some final words. I would also recommend you keep an eye out for something above you. Above? I responded before thinking momentarily. I guess a church usually has spots above and behind an altar or in the rafters high above to launch an attack from. I heard a hum in agreement. I wouldn't put it past Henry to have someone placed somewhere to either hit you with a poison dart or have an accident happen to ensure the marriage doesn't happen. You seem to be quite knowledgeable about these things. He chuckled. Let us say that I did some work before I started working for Mr. Toketsu. I chuckled as well in response as our conversation finished. With the two of us now in silence, I started to think a bit. I think if it's a direct attack from a person, I may use my gate or have a dagger placed on me to use and block the attack. If I use my gate, I could cause him to panic if he realized I am an adventurer. So it's a risk if I do that, but it would be fun to see the faces of the people as I show exactly who I am and who he's messing with. These were more or less my thoughts as I occupied myself on the way to the church. It was maybe 20 or so minutes later that we made it to our destination. I had seen the church before now in passing, and I never went inside or really looked at it until now. It almost looked like a mini castle with the way the spires and pillars were arranged. The front of the building had a large window made of stained circular glass depicting a picture of the goddess Eris. The area around the church was a very nice and well-kept garden with arches leading to and around the church. There were a few people waiting around outside chatting in nice dresses as well as suits. The carriage came to a stop next to a few others. Show time, I mumbled to myself as I opened the carriage door. I opened it with a rather graceful push. After making sure to swish my hair a few times to garner some more looks, I hopped down and turned my head to the right to view the people. There were people who had recognized me right away and smiled while waving, and a few people let out a small cheer since the groom had arrived. I didn't waste any more time, so I immediately started chatting up the guests. It was all filled with congratulations. What an extravagant suit. Where did you get it? I'm so happy for you and Cyrilla. And many more of the things you would hear before a wedding ceremony. I even talked to the women who were going to be the bridesmaids or this world's version of them if they were any different. They were with their significant others, so they filled the role of groomsmen since I didn't have anyone to fill that role. They were all Cyrilla's friends and seemed nice. After a good 45 minutes or so of chatting with the guests, I finally saw Fraser himself. He was currently talking to a few people which he soon dismissed, his buddy that I took down last night not being among them. Once they went into the church, Fraser caught me looking at him, so I gave him a small smile and wave. Oh, I don't think he liked that, I thought to myself in a sarcastic way. He then turned away and went off somewhere else. After he moved off I saw that all the bride and groomsmen were gathering over by a priest. Guess it's to go over who is going down the aisle first and whatnot. The priest then smiled and waved me over. When I arrived at the group, the priest extended his hand. I'm assuming you're the groom, he said with a joking tone, to which I nodded to. I'm Father Sam and I will be wedding you today. Michael, I responded with the fake name for now. It is a pleasure to meet you. Since there has been no rehearsal of the sorts, Sam continued, I don't want anyone looking like a fool up there, so I'll go over what's happening with all of you. I already went over the order of who is walking up first, so we're just gonna go inside and practice a bit. All you have to do is stand at the altar and look pretty, he joked, which we all shared a chuckle at. Just gotta say your vows and repeat what I ask you to repeat. Sound good? I nodded, good. Let's get started. He clapped his hands and we followed him through a side door. The inside of the church was pretty much what I imagined it would look like after we made it to the main cathedral. It was a very large room that could seat hundreds of people and had a large organ piano just slightly off to the side of an elevated platform where the priests would do their thing. There were also many stained glass windows throughout the place that were depicting holy figures such as Eris and even some other goddesses. Even back on Earth I haven't been to a church in a long time, never thought it'd be for a wedding. Much less my own. I admired the art throughout the church as well as the general atmosphere of the place, and it was peaceful to say the least. I stood at the altar and watched as the bridesmaids and groomsmen practiced the order of who was walking down the aisle first. It surely was boring, but all I thought to myself was, it's gonna be over soon and then I can go home. What even should I do when I get back? Maybe go on a vacation again to Tanaka's island and have some fun before I go back to the grind. Maybe even go on a difficult quest or two before then. That griffin quest might still be up. I let my mind wander as I stood by the altar, watching the group practice. I must have been lost in thought for a good while because all the people that were outside slowly started to filter in. Mr. Toketsu was not among them since he would probably be walking his daughter down the aisle. I then locked eyes with Mrs. Toketsu as she sat down and we exchanged a small nod. And with no further delays, it was time to begin. A pianist occupied the organ and proceeded to play a tune. All eyes then turned to the main entrance as the bride and groomsmen slowly entered one pair at a time. The whole church was filled with smiles and chatter as the people walked down the aisle. This would make a beautiful painting. The happy smiles of people in almost all situations can really do something nice, and it truly was a sight to behold. I nodded and smiled at all the men who stood behind me as well as the women opposite of me who all had beaming smiles. The music then shifted. I guess this is a multiversal wedding song. All the people in the stands rose at the shift in tune to the classic song that plays at any wedding. The only pair of eyes not directly at the beginning of the aisle belonged to a certain someone who I think we all know. I could see a smirking face from the corner of my vision. I hummed in thought, guessing he has a few things planned. With my thoughts preoccupied, I almost missed two things. One being a pair of eyes on the back of my head and the second being the bride. Cyrilla turned the corner wearing a simple yet elegant gown. The white gown didn't drag on the ground very far and she had a headpiece with what seemed like a veil, but it was not covering her face and was instead behind her. She walked down the aisle with a small smile, and her father, while knowing this was fake, was barely holding it together and seemed to be on the verge of tearing up. Part of me does feel bad, but it's for a good cause. When they were about halfway I had a bad feeling behind me. They were now at the front when I raised my right hand rather quickly and I felt something catch between my fingers that was slightly wet. Humph. Thin poison needle. They seemed confused on why I raised my hand, so I discreetly dropped the needle and did a dramatic bow and offered my hand towards Mr. Toketsu and Cyrilla. Cyrilla then unhooked her arm from her father and took my hand. Flawless. I smirked. And from the corner of my eye I could see a slight look of confusion and anger from Henry. Cyrilla now stood opposite of me as we held hands and looked towards Father Sam. We are gathered here today to witness the marriage of two really gosh darn looking good people. Everyone laughed a little at the joke. I hope the decision to enter this marriage was out of pure love. The essence of marriage is commitment and the acceptance of each other in entirety, as lovers, companions and friends. Everyone listened intently. Do either of you have a vow you'd like to speak or words to say to one another? I nodded. I do have something to say. The stage is yours. The short time we have known each other has been special. I looked her in the eyes. From the time we spent together in Axel to the time we've spent here, I smiled. And now I have some words for the big men and women upstairs. There were a few chuckles as I looked up. I'm sure you're watching us intently and are blessing us as we speak. There were a few ahs, but I don't think the other guys are too happy that I got her. There were a few mixed chuckles and I swear I could hear someone crack. Short and sweet, said Father Sam. Does the lady have anything to say? I don't think I could say anything to top what he says. There were more chuckles. All right then, he cleared his throat. Do you both pledge to share your lives openly with one another, and to speak the truth in love? Do you promise to honor and tenderly care for one another, cherish and encourage each other, stand together, through sorrows and joys, hardships and triumphs for all the days of your lives? We do, we both spoke. Is there anyone who objects to this marriage? If so, speak now, or forever hold your peace. There was a short silence before I spoke. I think he does, I said while pointing at the ceiling. Everyone was confused and looked up. There was a short flash as a large thunk was heard and something fell from the rafters and onto the floor with a loud thud, slight crunch and a clang. Everyone jumped in surprise as the object groaned audibly, revealing it to be a hooded individual who had a dagger that was now on the floor. The whole church seemed very surprised and some even screamed out. Should have acted sooner, I said while lowering myself down towards the individual. My hand then reached out towards the hooded man when their arms suddenly lashed out with a blade that was hidden in their sleeve and lunged directly for my gut. The people gasped audibly as it seemed like I had been pierced through the gut. You should really work on your aim, I spoke as I shot out my arm and gripped the man around the neck. Still wouldn't have hit me though, points for trying though. I then slowly lifted up the figure as they clawed at my hand. Poor people didn't know what the heck was going on. Cyrilla seemed troubled but understood what was happening, same with her mother and father. Father Sam was shocked, but he also seemed angry, which was definitely understandable. Now let's see who our assassin is. I then pulled the hood off the assassin and the crowd gasped at who was under it. Oh. You're familiar. The face was revealed to be one of the men that always followed Henry around, not the one I had stopped last night but one of the ones Henry always spoke with. I would ask what you think you're doing. But I can already guess what you wanted to do. The only response I was hearing was gurgles as the man was choking. Guess I should ease up a bit. I lessened my grip just enough for him to speak. You gonna tell me who sent you, or do I gotta make you? Fuck you. Wrong answer. There was then a loud thud and a crack as I punched the man in the ribs with enough force to easily shatter at least 3 ribs. I'm not gonna ask again. The man was pale but still seemed to not want to say anything. I dropped him and he slowly started to scramble back. I don't think so. My smile went almost devilish. There was suddenly a pressure that overtook the room. It was similar to killer intent, but this was more like a weight that sat in your stomach and pushed you down. My body was slowly encompassed in a gold light that almost blinded the people that were still awake within the church. There was also a slight gust of wind as the light quickly flashed brighter and then slowly dimmed away. After everyone lowered their arms, they couldn't help but stare in awe. What was once the slightly smug yet nice Michael was replaced by someone else. There now stood a man covered in gold full-plate armor that glistened and lit up the church even more than it already was. Haven't used my armor in a while, I thought to myself as I donned my armor. With my hair now defying gravity and the intimidating yet mesmerizing sight of my armor gleaming in all its glory. I stared at this man with cold red eyes that all but screamed the fact that this man was about to experience a pain like no other. I slowly crossed my arms as I looked a little further down so my face was shadowed and all you could see were my eyes. Speak the name of the one who sent you or else dash. Swirling golden masses appeared behind me numbering in the 20s. Weapons of all sorts slowly slid out. You will not live to see tomorrow, I finished while in my intimidation pose, as I like to call it. To say everyone in the church was shocked would be an understatement. There was at least 15 people who were passed out and the rest were scared as one could be, Cyrilla and her parents included. WW was him. The man pointed behind him towards a figure near an aisle closer to the back of the church. I don't think I need to say who he was pointing at, but just the reaction on everyone's face was absolutely priceless. There was an audible gasp as everyone slowly turned to see a man that looked like was trying his absolute hardest to not shit his pants. The situation seemed to catch up with Henry as he realized all the stares and my knowing smirk. In a bout of pure panic he sprung up and tried to run. Fwahahaha, I laughed as a new portal opened and fired out a chain at breakneck speeds. There's no use running now. Makes it all the worse for you that you did run. The chains reached Henry and wrapped his upper body and legs in chains. He collapsed onto the floor with a hard thud as the church doors burst open. There were multiple clanging footsteps as armored figures rounded a corner into the main part of the church. The multiple footsteps were revealed to be the town's guard. What's all the commotion? Spoke a burly man who led a group of about 5 other guards. Well, you see, my good sir, I spoke while dismissing my gate. This individual here has tried to get me assassinated at my own wedding. And through that fellow over there, I said while jabbing a thumb over my shoulder towards the would-be assassin who was barely clinging to consciousness. And I have more than enough witnesses who will say the same. The guard seemed incredibly suspicious as he looked around at the people in the church. Is what this man speaks the truth? Everyone slowly nodded. And who exactly are you? I chuckled. I have been going under the name Michael while I have been in this town. A portal opened above my hand as I held it out. My true name is Gilgamesh. My adventurer card dropped into my hand, and I have been hired to bring this very man right here to justice. He has been involved in the drug trade as well as in sex trafficking. More gasps from the people in the church, not to mention this is now the second person he has sent to try and take my life. I am also the one who raided that building last night, who had the trapped women. The guards from last night can tell you the same. The guard hummed as he looked at my card before his eyes widened a slight amount. Wait, aren't you the one who took down a Demon King general? Sounded like a sitcom with the amount of gasps. Indeed I am. I took my card back and sent it to my gate. I believe you should have plenty of evidence and witness statements to put this guy away, so I'll let you take it from here. The guard nodded. Thank you for your service. I'll personally make sure everything goes smoothly. He then looked to his men. Get this guy and the other one out of here and bring M down to jail. Yes sir, they shouted in unison as they went to fulfill their orders. And I will ask that everyone please give us a statement and leave the church so we may do so. I nodded to the guard and turned back to head towards the altar. Guess this will be a wedding to remember. I smirked as I approached Cirilla and her family who were now standing together. Hopefully this all goes well and he stays in jail, spoke Mr. Toketsu. I'm sure he will. I didn't go through all that prep work for nothing. They all chuckled as everyone slowly started to file out and make us the only ones in the church. Mr. Toketsu then reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. It's a check that you can bring to your guild and they should reward you the appropriate amount. He handed me the check and extended his other hand to shake mine. I can't begin to thank you enough. Although this ending, as you could call it, may have been a little too much. On the contrary, I believed it to be too anticlimactic. This brought out a smile on their faces. Cirilla then gave me a hug around my armored waist. Either way, thank you so much, she said with a smile. I chuckled as I ruffled her hair a bit. No worries, I had a fair amount of fun coming out here and spending time with you all. She then unwrapped herself from me and proceeded to take the ring I gave her off her hand before I stopped her. There's no need. Keep it, she seemed surprised. I have no need for it. Consider it a gift, she nodded and said thank you. I then gave Mrs. Toketsu a handshake before turning around as they also started to leave. Are you gonna go back to Axel? Cirilla asked. I will be, yes, I said as I flashed away my armor and was now dressed in my black leather jacket outfit. I can't stay since I promised a new acquaintance of mine that I would get them a job at my guild, so I must leave now. I then went my separate way from the three and gave a small wave behind me as they said out their goodbyes. Man, I can't wait to get home. It didn't take too long for me to reach the cafe where I planned to meet Ela, and I didn't make any stops on the way. When I did make it to the cafe, I saw her sitting outside at a table with a small bag of her belongings. She was wearing a black short-sleeve shirt, blue pants, and black shoes. She hadn't noticed me yet, so I just plopped myself onto the seat in front of her. Boo, I said lightly. She had had a cup of tea or coffee in her hands and jumped slightly. Oh, it's you. You scared me, she half pouted. With a slight smile, I waved my hand dismissively as I leaned back into my chair and hooked my other arm on the back of it. My business here is concluded, so if you're ready to leave we can head out now and find some transportation. She nodded after finishing her beverage and standing up. I've been bored as hell all morning waiting for you. She smirked a bit while grabbing her bag. Oh. I stood up. Well, your entertainment is here to escort you. I bowed dramatically. Loose the punky leather jacket and that performance might be believable. Any outfit I wear can be used for almost any occasion. But this one is comfortable and stylish. You do fill it out well, she smirked as I chuckled. We then set off right after. So how did everything go? As good as it could, I guess. I instilled some fear and made sure Fraser couldn't slip through the cracks without having major problems that would just make everything worse. Instilled fear. I can be pretty intimidating when I want to, I smirked devilishly. We shared small talk along the way to the stables, more of just getting to know each other and pass the time. When we did get a carriage ride back to Axel, we more or less did our own thing to pass the time with some idle chit-chat here and there. No major events happened, but it was a fun trip back. Whenever we stopped for the night, or stopped just to give the horses a rest, we would talk with the rest of the people that were also taking the carriage with us. I even prepared a few meals for everyone and some alcohol to liven things up. All in all, it was a fun trip back. We had arrived in Axel at around noon, maybe closer to 10 o'clock after about a week of travel. Once everyone was cleared and I exchanged a few words with the guards that recognized me, we disembarked and headed towards the guild. There was a slight amount of snow on the ground and the air was a little chilly, enough to the point we could see our breaths. I have a question, spoke Ela as I turned my head to look at her. I've never been to Axel, but I heard it's called the Town of Beginnings. How come you haven't left to go to a better guild and not stay at the beginning? She asked. I do own a house here and have made plenty of friends. As corny as it sounds, I don't want to live anywhere else but here. Or maybe the house I have on Tanaka Island, but I haven't seen the house since it was built. She seemed surprised. You own a house on a resort island but haven't even seen it? I did a quest for the owner and decided to invest, so he had a residence built for me, but that was months ago now. I finished as we finally made it to the guild doors. I didn't waste any time and walked into the guild but held the door open once I was in for Ela. She said a thank you and sighed. It feels good to be out of the cold. I made a small humph as the doors shut. I lived in a place once where it was 10 times colder at this time of the year. She raised an eyebrow, but before she could respond, Gilgamesh, you're back, shouted a random adventurer at a table, which caused a loud cheer to erupt before they went back to what they were doing. You seem to be popular. Of course. Why wouldn't I be? I said in a boisterous tone. Now let's go speak to Luna and get you that job. We walked up to the front desk where we saw Luna writing something on a piece of paper before she noticed us approach. Welcome back, she said with a smile, and you brought a friend? I put a hand on Ela's shoulder and pushed her forward slightly. This is Ela, I was hoping you could do me a favor. The two exchanged greetings before she turned back to me. What kind of favor? I met her on my quest and we have become friends. She needs a job and I thought she would make a great patron, or whatever you had in mind. Luna looked towards her. Really? She nodded. That would be wonderful. Any friend of Gilgamesh is welcome here. She stood from her seat and walked around her area into the main part of the guild. Do you have experience at all? She asked with a smile. Yeah, I worked at a bar. Wonderful. If you come with me I can take you in the back and we can discuss details. Before they went off I handed Luna the check I got from Mr. Toketsu. I'll get this processed soon, so take a seat and relax, I'll be back shortly. I nodded as she took Ela in the back, who seemed a little uncomfortable with how nice Luna was being. Well, I guess I'll have a seat and order some food. Before I could even turn to head towards a seat I heard two familiar voices in a heated argument outside. How could you even think of burning my tracksuit? Yelled a certain boy. Well, if somebody would have more money to get a place to live we wouldn't have this problem, screamed back a girl. I had money and you stole it all from me just to pay off your stupid debts. Hell, you even sold our coats so we can't even keep warm. Now hold on, why don't we relax, said another female voice. You're not a part of this, the other two said back in unison. So cruel, the voice seemed to enjoy being berated. The doors were then opened as a familiar quartet entered the building. I can see you are still arguing constantly as usual, I spoke aloud. For heads turned to where I was. I would have thought by now this would have been solved. Darkness was the first to speak. Oh. You're back. She walked ahead of the group. How did the quest go? Very well, even made a new friend who will be working at the guild now. Who did you manage to convince to work here of all places? Asked Kazuma. Her name is Ela, so I expect you to treat her with kindness. They all nodded. What's this I hear about clothes burning? Immediately Kazuma and Aqua started an incomprehensible argument. Megumin was the one who answered. Apparently Aqua tried to use Kazuma's outfit from home as fuel for a fire since they're still living in a barn and it's been cold lately. Unfortunate for them, I said with not much sympathy. You guys here to pick a quest? We haven't intended to. Darkness spoke. We all happened to cross paths and I believe they were here to eat before they visited some magic shop. They have no money but are willing to go to a magic shop. Megumin answered next. There's a shop on the other side of town who used to be an adventurer and he was hoping to learn a new skill. I believe the name was Wiz's Magic Shop, Darkness said. I have been there before. A nice woman, if not a little odd, I responded. It's good to see you again, but we should probably deal with this, so we'll catch up later, Darkness said while ushering the two away. If they're visiting Wiz I might join them after Ela gets settled in and starts training. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.